So we have a new week, a fresh new zodiac season, as well as we see that the sun will be entering the sign of Leo on Monday, and some fresh perspectives as we see Mercury, the planet that rules over our thinking and information exchange, shifting signs into the grounded earth sign of Virgo. So this week is definitely one of fresh air, breathing a fresh air of perspectives into our lives, but also there are a few transits that could indicate a higher likelihood for potential sort of disagreements, but we'll dive into all of that. Hello friends, it's your girl Alina, back for another week ahead forecast video, namely for this July 22nd to the 28th week. How y'all doing? How was last week? Go ahead and comment down below how you're doing, how things are playing out for you. But with that said, let's just jump in. All right, first up on Monday, July 22nd, Monday is ruled by the moon. So we see that currently the moon is in the sign of Aquarius, making today and the next few days that it's still in the sign optimal for things like collaboration, exploring things, and maybe approaching something that hasn't been working for a while from a different perspective in order to see some different results. And not being afraid to ask for help and work with other people in the process if we need to. There's just a lot of easy flowing energy within that space right now. But we also see that on Monday, the sun will be leaving the sign of Cancer, entering the sign of Leo, marking the beginning of Leo season. So I want to pause and say happy birthday to all of my Leo friends. We appreciate you, we love you, and we thank you. Obviously, our natal charts are so nuanced, so this doesn't show up very clearly for every single Leo, but we really do appreciate the sort of archetypal characters that Leo embodies, which is being a little less afraid to take on leadership positions. And I feel like a lot of times in astrology, we usually see the descriptions of the unevolved versions of the astrology signs, and I feel like Leo gets a bad rap in that they're associated with like narcissists or people who are self-centered. But on the flip side of that, I feel like when Leo is evolved and utilizing their powers for good in so many ways, they make such great advocates for their friends and their family. They utilize that skill of not being as afraid of being seen or being judged and showing up exactly as themselves and allowing their authenticity to flow. They can utilize that to advocate for people around them, but also to kind of be that leader. Think of a collaborative space where there's a person who does more of the research or the other person who does more of the creativity type things. And then there's the Leo who's there, who's ready to communicate and help them put all those things together in this packaged message to then speak it and present it, whether it be at work or at school for a presentation or anything like that. But ultimately, when the sun is in Leo, it's in its home sign. The sun rules over the sign of Leo. So it's very happy in this state. And so for the next 4 months, it's really imbuing a lot of supportive energy when it comes to us embodying Leo aspects such as perseverance, courage, tapping into our confidence and learning how to embody that more, especially when it comes to speaking up for ourselves in different ways, but also protecting our inner child and speaking up for and protecting and allowing our inner child to really flow through. And it really makes for this second half of the summer to be a lot more social in that way. Following the sun entering the sign of Leo, we see that it will be forming an opposition aspect with Pluto, which is currently in Aquarius. Now this will all be happening on Monday, and this transit will be one that will be felt over the next few days as well. But it really is the type that can potentially spark an inner sort of, like a midlife crisis or an identity crisis, or just us feeling the need to kind of pause and reflect on, wait, am I doing this right? And I say that because, the sun rules over aspects of our ego and our self-image. And when it has this more challenging opposition aspect with Pluto, which really rules over our shadow side, things that maybe have been swept under the rug or things that are a bit harder to process that are calling to be acknowledged in some way in order for us to transform and grow and change. When that happens, all oppositions call for us to strike a balance between the two energies of the astral bodies that are involved, right? So we have this sort of power struggle between our ego and our sense of self and our identity and who we see ourselves as, having to deal with potential situations either on Monday or maybe throughout this week where we notice that something's happening that's kind of challenging our identity in some way, whether that's direct, of somebody kind of pointing out an inconsistency of like, you keep saying this, but you do this opposite thing. Or maybe it's a situation where you're kind of facing fruits of your labor. You're reaping what you've sown in some way where it's very clear, like, oh, I don't like this, but I also see that it's a result of my own action. So how am I going to grapple with this? That is the type of energy that the sun opposing Pluto can imbue. And so on Monday, there can be a potential of there being something where you might feel like your identity, your ego, or your sense of self is almost challenged a little bit, but it's likely manifesting as this inner dialogue that could happen. You might notice that other people might come to you, or you might notice that there's themes of discussions like that, of like, on a collective level, Pluto is in the sign of Aquarius, which is a very collective sign. It's all about our community and humanitarian efforts as well, where you might notice a spark in conversations of, are we actually doing the things that we say that we want to do? Like, are we actually doing things that we say that we believe in? So those type of themes on Monday. Next up, on Tuesday, July 23rd, we know that Tuesday is ruled by Mars, which is the planet of action, aggression, energy, and passion, making Tuesday an optimal day for sort of initiating things, getting in action, especially if on Monday, or over the weekend, you've really been thinking about a lot of things. We know that on either Sunday or Saturday for you, we had a full moon in Capricorn. So there was this energetic peak where our inner world was coming to the surface for many of us, and maybe there were revelations and things that kind of came up, or dots that were connected in some way with this lunar cosmic spotlight being at play so close to this date. And so on Tuesday, it could be a great day for us to maybe put things in motion of taking aligned actions with, maybe we set some intentions of letting go of something that was hindering us. Like maybe we're actually taking aligned steps towards that, or something like that. Maybe something having to do with Pluto and the sun as well. But Tuesday being a day ruled by Mars makes it so that tackling sometimes more arduous tasks feels a little bit more approachable. But on Tuesday, we see that the moon will be entering the sign of Pisces. So when we see that the moon that already rules over a water sign of Cancer, that is all about our emotions and our intuition, entering this sign of Pisces, which is really all about emotions and intuition, as well as our imagination and how we idealize things and this sort of disconnect from reality, so to speak. When we see that, it can make it so the next few days can be very helpful when it comes to planning things, visualizing the future, visualizing and idealizing what we want, and really having that sort of inner conversation of what we truly want deep down, because that's truly what the moon rules over. Next up, on Wednesday, July 24th, we know that Wednesday is ruled by Mercury, making it a great day for socializing, things of information exchange, conversation, being chatty, learning about things, doing some research, and even planning sort of short-term travel on Wednesday can be a great optimal day for that. But we see that on Wednesday, kind of semi in theme, we see that the moon in Pisces will actually be trining with Jupiter in Gemini. Now, as many of you already know, Jupiter is the planet of expansion and even luck. And on one side of the coin, it can really expand the state of the other planet that's involved in its transit in a good way, and that it's really amplifying things. Maybe something's going on, for example, with the moon. Maybe we're having this inner dialogue and we're having these emotions that are really happy and loving, and we're tapping into where we're at in that space. And when Jupiter comes in, it can really amplify those happy feelings. But on the flip side to that, Jupiter can sometimes bring in a potential of excess, where we're doing too much, because it can expand and magnify things. And because we do see that the moon is in Pisces, this more imaginative sign that sometimes can lean towards escapism as well, it can increase the likelihood of an excess of indulgences, an excess of escapism, of trying to kind of like disconnect from the world. It can increase the likelihood of an excess of also even oversharing. But ultimately, I will say that this type of transit is not really one that really results in any sort of drama or notable issues, but more so it can increase the potential of just doing a little too much. So it'll be helpful to be aware of that and to, act accordingly if you do notice that that's occurring either with you or with somebody else. You might notice that somebody might overshare in some way, but ultimately Jupiter is a benefic planet. It is one that ultimately wants to do good and is trying to magnify things for the betterment of us. So it's important to be aware of both sides of the coin with that sort of magnifying and expansive aspect of Jupiter. Also happening on Wednesday, we see that the moon will be conjuncting with Saturn, with both of them being in Pisces. So when we see that the moon comes together with Saturn, it can just tend to make us feel a lot more sensible, practical, and it can help to keep our feet on the ground in a lot of ways. So considering the other transits that we see with the moon and Jupiter, it's unlikely that it'll be too intense, because we see this other transit with Saturn sort of balancing itself out. But when we see this type of transit, it's one that, again, can make us feel a lot more realistic with our thinking and our emotions, not get too carried away with things, but it can also make it so If things aren't going well emotionally, or especially like when it comes to family and things like that, it can increase the likelihood of us being hard on ourselves, because Saturn is the strict teacher. So it tends to bring to our awareness whether or not we are meeting the callings that the universe is asking us to grow into and things like that. So those life lessons of like, dang, I know I keep procrastinating, or I know that I've been avoidant of this. So that self-awareness aspect, it can tend to heighten that. And so if you feel like you aren't really in alignment with that right now, or you feel kind of lost, you don't really know how to implement it, it can make it so when the moon comes together with Saturn in this way, it can increase the likelihood of us feeling down and a little bit more emotional in that way. So just be aware of that, and remember to be soft on yourself in a lot of ways, and recognize that it is a journey. Life is about the journey, So not be too hard on yourself about things, and also be cognizant of too much comparison as well. It's so easy to compare our lives to people's highlight reels online, social media, celebrities, and think that we are behind or anything like that, and challenging how do you define behind, and where does that come from? Who set those standards? Is that in alignment with like who you are, like your personality and what works for you? Those are the type of conversations you can have with yourself that can help you to sort of process that if you notice that comes up on Wednesday or around that day. Next up, Thursday is definitely making out to feel like a pretty productive one, or one where we're feeling a lot more capable, focused, and we have a lot more clarity on what we want to do and things like that. Thursday is ruled by Jupiter, so it can be a very expansive day. It can be considered a pretty lucky day. So think about anything you might want to do on a lucky day. It can be optimal for that. But we see that on Thursday, the moon will be entering Aries, really setting the tone for the day in the next few days, for there being a lot more supportive energy when it comes to advocating for ourselves, getting really clear on our action plan, and really initiating things, not overthinking things as much, thanks to the moon transiting the sign of Aries. But we also see that on this day, Mercury will be leaving the sign of Leo and entering the sign of Virgo, which is a very grounded earth sign. And Virgo is all about finding balance, finding routine, structure, creating a sense of balance, not just for you, but for the people around you. Really being meticulous in the details of things, especially if you feel sort of passionate about that. Now, Mercury is pretty happy to be in this sign because it's one of the signs that it rules over. So it's definitely going to be imbuing pretty clear thinking and very practical sort of thought processes, where it's going to feel a bit easier for us to see a path forward through our processing of things, of situations as they come. But I will say that this might present as being a bit more difficult as we see that Mercury goes retrograde later in the summer. So we'll talk about that in the week that it happens, but just take note of that. But we also see on Thursday that the sun in Leo will be sextiling with Mars, which is in Gemini. Now, this is the type of transit that can make us just feel very capable and excited and ready to take action. So you see what I mean, that Thursday can feel pretty productive and very energized, because we see that the moon enters Aries, Mercury enters Virgo, which is very focused on what needs to be done and focused on balanced routine and the structures necessary to sort of approach things from a balanced place. And we also see that Mars is playing this notable role with the sun on the same day. And I do want to note that I don't want to frame this all as, this is great for productivity, like going to work and doing better and optimizing, but more so that even within your home, Virgo is really considered this representation of the divine feminine. And there's a lot of things pointing to how well that these transits can help with us, especially if we're thinking of like, man, I need to find more balance in my life. I need to set more boundaries. I need to get really clear and practical on how I can basically approach life and in different aspects of life from a sustainable approach, so that I'm not overworking or doing too much. These are the type of transit that can be very helpful with getting clear on that as well. Another aspect of the sun coming together with Mars in this way is that it can make it so people feel a lot more social and a lot more confident to talk and express how they're feeling. Next up, on Friday, July 26th, we know Friday is ruled by Venus, making it an optimal day for doing anything romantic, anything that pours into the love and relationships in your life. But we see that on Friday, Chiron will be going retrograde in Aries, and it will stay retrograde pretty much for the rest of the year. For any of you who don't already know, Chiron is called the wounded healer in astrology, and that's because it's an asteroid that is known to sort of rule over wounds and traumas that we experience in our life that can oftentimes be tied to us being able to learn from those things and process them, transmute them in ways that can then lead to us being able to help others who end up going through those things, or help others prevent themselves from going through the same things that we went through. But it's usually tied to some sort of trauma or issue or sort of triggers that are coming to the surface, especially when in retrograde. So when we see that it goes retrograde in Aries, there is this higher likelihood of things like our wounded egos or past transgressions kind of coming back, retrograding in our own lives, coming back to the forefront of our awareness, and us being called to process them in some way. There's a potential likelihood of there being hiccups or mishaps as we are on our journey of getting over past things and letting go of past things and processing past things, and then kind of coming back up to kind of bite us, or feeling triggered because something's coming up and we don't realize, oh, I'm actually not over that. And it's all about how we choose to handle those things, right? And so between now and the end of the year, there can be a higher likelihood of potential triggers coming up, but usually them being familiar ones that we've known about for a while. With this involving Chiron, it's usually tied to us being called to revisit those things, to check in with where we're at, how we're handling that, or what we think of it now, present day, compared to maybe when it first occurred or when these things first happened, or things like that. But ultimately, you're human. Don't be hard on yourself if you notice that things pop up over the next few months where you might feel triggered, or you feel like your ego is a little bit more sensitive and so you might be defensive, or you notice that with others. But it's really about being open to the lesson that's behind that. And also not being afraid to separate yourself, to process that on your own, to prevent yourself from sort of lashing out, if that makes sense. If that is even a thing for you. That's the thing about retrogrades, is that it's not always guaranteed that you're going to have retrograde issues. It's really dependent on your personal journey within that realm of your life, within the realms of past traumas or issues or wounds that you've had, and how you have processed them or worked with them or transmuted them or anything like that. Next up, on Saturday, the 27th, we know Saturday is ruled by Saturn. So this is a day that can be very beneficial to lean into. I'm sorry, y'all. I'm literally looking out my window and I see a squirrel holding on for dear life to a tree that's just like moving in the wind because there's a storm a-brewing. And I hope that they're okay. I'm sure they are. They've been living out there for a while, but it's just, I'm like, whoa, hold on tight, bro, because it's a tall tree. On Saturday, the 27th, it looks like in general, based off of these transits, there's a higher likelihood of disagreements or not being on the same page, especially when it comes to family and more immediate, closer people in your life and in your circle. And I say that because we see that the moon will be squaring off with not just the sun, but also with Pluto. And when we see these type of transits, they tend to increase the likelihood that we're just not seeing eye to eye with people in some form or another, because this is a square off, this is a more challenging aspect, and it's really one where the energy of these astral bodies are at odds right now, and they're not really flowing at all. So there is a higher likelihood of that. These are the type of transits that can also lead to compulsive behavior. Pluto is really the planet that rules over our deepest shadows, triggers, secrets, and things like that. And it's really the planet that calls for us to get more intimate, get more deep, and dive deeper into the things that need to be faced in a lot of ways. When it's having this opposition with the moon, it can create a situation where it's like our inner world does not want to deal with that. Or you notice that other people, they just don't want to deal with something that needs to be handled. And so there's this issue between people. So there can be a higher likelihood of that. But I will say that on the same day, on Saturday, the moon will also be trining with Mercury. And a trine aspect with Mercury really makes it so it feels a lot easier for us to speak our truth and to articulate what's going on with our inner world, which is influenced and ruled over by the moon. And finally, on Sunday, July 28th, we see that Sunday is ruled by the sun. And so it can be a great day for pouring into ourselves, thinking about our vitality. What supports our vitality? What supports us stepping into the world and feeling confident and courageous? And that makes for Sunday to be a great day for a reset, a Sunday reset, where you're kind of setting yourself up for success for the week if you have time to do that. But we see that on Sunday, the moon in Taurus will be sextiling with Saturn in Pisces. And this is the type of transit that can really bring a sense of security and stability on an emotional level. And that's because Saturn is really all about security, stability, maturity, and discipline. And when it comes together in this complementary way in a sextile with the moon, it can make us just feel a bit more grounded and capable in what we're doing, and just feeling like things are a bit more in order than they used to be. It feels like we can kind of see that more clearly on Sunday. But with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up this weekly reading. Comment down below what you think of the reading, if you feel like you've been noticing any of these transits, like the themes of them, or feeling any of it so far. How was the Capricorn full moon for you? I want to know. Comment that down below. And if not that, comment 3 smiley face emojis, just to let me know that you made it to the end. But with that said, I will leave you with my favorite quote, and that is, be gentle with yourself, because life is about the journey, not the destination. All right, I'll see you on the next one. Peace.